Our next speaker is someone we're very pleased to have, whom we've known from other visits to Roseburg. A real expert, as far as I'm concerned, on a number of things. Ernie Niemi. Ernie, thank you.
Thank you. Would it be better if I used the microphone? Mr. Robinson, the microphone doesn't work very well if I just talk loud.
Talk loud.
I'll talk loud. That helps me because I move around a lot. I really do appreciate being invited here. It's always nice to come back to Roseburg. I have family who lives up on the North Umpqua River. I actually started my career in what was then called the Coos-Curry-Douglas Economic Development District. And a large part of my job at that point was looking at how we can promote the logging and of our forests, taking advantage of those resources, and developing jobs, developing new wealth in the economy, communities. So what I want to talk about today is this challenge. Because this appears, it seems to be underlying an awful lot of the discussion that we have about forests, whether it's with respect to herbicides, or it's fish, or it's riparian zones, or it's recreational areas or whatnot. How can we manage the forest best to stimulate economic growth, generate stable, high-wage jobs, and can we manage it so the benefits exceed the costs? Now, most people are concerned about number 1 and 2. Economists are concerned about number 3. Because we have learned, as we look back over the centuries, that communities that manage their resources so that the costs exceed the benefits, that is to say, what they get back from doing something is worth less than what it costs to do it. If the costs exceed the benefits, those communities are on a path to poverty. Conversely, communities that manage their resources, whether it's timber, mining, or whatnot, so that the benefits exceed the costs, they are on a path towards prosperity. And so it annoys some of my conservation friends when I say, if the benefits of cutting down a tree exceed the cost, cut the tree down. That's what economics means. I annoy some of the people who are friends of mine who are loggers if I say, if the costs exceed the benefits, don't cut the tree. That's essentially what this means. So let's look a little bit at what's happening in the timber industry right now. You see that harvests have stabilized. So we go back into the 80s, we see this decline. A large part of that's what happened on federal lands. But since about 1994, when the Northwest Forest Plan was adopted, we've basically been at about 4 billion board feet. Now here's a recession, but we're coming back up out of that. Next. This is what's happened to exports. And again, we go way back. And by the way, I apologize for these slides because they're not going to be consistent. They're going to look different. I'm basically here as a reporter. I did not put all of these numbers together. So I'm pulling information from different places and presenting it to you. This graph goes back to 1961. Goes up here, we're down here around 2000. We've been at about 400 million. 400 million out of 4 billion means 1 log in 10 was exported. It's gone up to about 1 log in 5. And I haven't been able to get more recent data, official data, but certainly it's been reported within the industry itself on blogs that last year was 1 log out of 2. So you can understand what the implications are for jobs. Here's what's happened. As the timber industry has basically been at the same level, about 4 billion board feet, its share of the economy, GDP, which is called gross domestic product, that's a measure of everything that's produced, goods and services. The share has gone down. So that it used to be about 12% back in the 60s. It's now down around 1%. The reason that these lines change, and you see that the color will change in some of the other slides, is that back in the 1990s, the federal government changed how it collects data and how it reports data. And so basically we're trying to find something that is consistent with the old data. And so the red is wood products, the blue, the dark blue is wood products, the red one is adjusted for some of the changes that have taken place in the data collection. Next, please. Here's what's happened with jobs. jobs, first of all, you can see jobs are very unstable. They go up and down, up and down, up and down. But they used to be up here around 70,000. And then they've gone down. They've gone down since about 1985. What do you think might have happened around 1985 that caused that to start to go down?
Not at all.
Broke the union.
Well, from my perspective, the big thing that happened is that the industry busted the unions.
Yeah.
Right? They busted the unions in the mid-1980s, and if any of you lived through that, that was not a small event. That was a big-time major event that took place along the entire West Coast. And when they busted the unions, they were able to then start to lay people off. We now see that we're down around 25,000, 30,000 down here. Well, a lot of people say that what happened down here, this decline, is all because of spotted owls. It's not so. Spotted owls really took place in about 1994 when the Northwest Forest Plan was implemented. That's here. And basically, all the adjustment was over by the end of that decade, by the year 2000. And during that decade, spotted owls accounted for only about 1/3 of the loss in jobs. I'll come back to the question later. Right? So this is not owls. There's a piece of it is, sure. But it's something more fundamental than that. This is the latest state forecast. Basically what we see, if you combine the very first graph on harvest, basically stable, jobs are going down, the number of jobs per unit of timber, whether it's acres or million board feet or whatever, is going down. It has for a long time, and it's going to continue to go down. So the expectation for the next 7 years is basically this is an industry that's going to lose jobs. At the same time that the state is gaining an awful lot of jobs. If you go back to 1980s, workers in the timber industry earned about a 30% premium compared to all other workers in the state. That premium has shrunk so that now it is totally gone, and in some years it's the other way around. The average worker in the timber industry here, 2009, earned less than the statewide average. What does that mean? This is about $40,000 per year. If you look at all of the jobs in the industry in this county, and you multiply it times this premium of 30%, which is about $12,000, right? So if the industry were still paying a 30% premium, it would be paying $52,000. That missing $12,000 times about 4,000 workers in the industry in this county. The industry has reached into the paychecks of its workers, and it has pulled out $48 million a year. That's what happens when you bust unions. There's nothing unique about this industry. That's what happens. So $48 million are gone because of busting the unions. This is a comparison done by the Oregon Department of Forestry comparing a timber harvest tax in 3 states: California, Washington, and Oregon. Let's focus on green, because that's Washington. And the blue line. The blue line is money from the Washington Forest Timber Harvest Tax that is dedicated to counties. So if Oregon had the Washington system, they would be receiving about $40 million a year. Counties on the west side of Oregon. They would receive less in the red, that's California. Actually, that's not true, because after this graph was put together, California actually increased their forest harvest tax by 1%. So if you had the California system, you'd be getting, again, around $40 million. Well, this is Oregon down here. Yeah, it's smaller, but it's there. but it's also meaningless. That $10 million goes only from the industry's left pocket to its right pocket. None of that money goes to counties. None of it goes for general public services. And the reason is that in 1993, when there was all this panic about owls, the industry was able to persuade Oregon's legislature to get rid of the timber harvest tax. So Oregon used to have a timber harvest tax in this area, and it doesn't. So again, what did the industry do? The industry reached into county coffers and it pulled about $40 million out of it in a year. I think most of you probably heard about this notion of inequality in the United States. And I used to think that this was Wall Street versus, us poor people, little people out here. And it's in Oregon as well. This graph shows for workers who worked all 4 quarters in 1990, what happened to them? Those who were in the lowest 20% in 1990 saw their wages go down by about 7-8%. These two groups saw their wages go down more than 10%. It's only up here, the top 1%, that saw their wages go up like this, and the remainder of that 20% up a little bit. This isn't only because of timber, but please understand that what happened when the industry broke the unions, eliminated high-wage jobs, reduced the wages of its remaining workers, and took away money that otherwise would have gone to the county, that exactly fits this parallel, right here. Now again, when I grew up, my family was in the timber industry. Absolutely. My father lost a finger in the timber industry. So I know what that's about. Well, a lot of that money that went into the industry stayed in communities because that's where people live. And that's not the case now. These people really don't live out where they used to. And so an awful lot of that money really does go in the same way that the logs go and the money goes outside of this state. And so when we talk about communities in Oregon having trouble, this is one of the main reasons why they're having trouble. Right here. The spotted owl was one of the greatest sociological economic experiments in the United States in the last several decades. It had sociologists salivating on people who could do their PhD thesis, come out to Oregon and find out all of the chaos and mayhem that occurred when the federal government, bureaucrats back in Washington, D.C., reduced logging out in Oregon and Washington and Northern California. And so they came out and they did a tremendous amount of studies. In the year 2000, the National Research Council summarized that literature. And the truth is, it was just the opposite. Communities that had a higher concentration within the timber industry, a higher percentage of their workers in this industry had these problems. More than communities that were otherwise identical, but had a lower concentration. The most recent literature that I've seen on this, from about 5-7 years ago, finds the very same thing, right around here. The closer a community is to federal lands, the fewer of these problems it has. The closer these communities are to state or to private lands, the more of these problems that they have. And this is the gorilla in the room now, this carpet. I did not know until a year and a half ago, that the forests of Western Oregon, Western Washington, have the highest concentration, highest density of carbon per acre of any ecosystem in the world, with one or two very small minor exceptions. This really is where it happens. when you cut those trees down, a large part of that carbon goes up in the atmosphere. By some estimates, it's at least 3/4 of it goes up in the atmosphere over maybe 15, 20 years. By some estimates, 85% of it goes up in the atmosphere. So when you cut these trees down, the big trees, an awful lot of that carbon goes up, causes climate change, causes droughts. By the way, we're in the 4th year of a drought. If you want to see the costs of drought, go over east of the mountains and you can see it. If you want to see the cost of drought, go to the grocery store and try to buy California-grown foods. So these are real costs. And let's try to put that into the equation. The DeFazio bill, which many of you know, proposed in effect to sell federal lands. As a result of that, or as part and parcel of that proposal, the industry estimated how much they would be willing to pay for those lands. Now, a corporation figures out what they will pay by looking at the stream of profits, say through the rest of this century, the stream of profits, year by year by year, and then collapsing that back to a single price that they'd be willing to pay. The technical jargon is that that's a present discounted value. So it's the present value that is equivalent to this entire stream the rest of the century. $5,000 an acre. Be very clear. That's not saying that if you want to go cut this acre right here tomorrow, that it's worth only $5,000. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this stream over the rest of the century, $5,000 per acre today. If you flip the coin over and do the same analysis for the carbon costs, you get the present value of the cost, and it comes down. There's an effort by, basically what happened is they locked the economists from about a dozen federal agencies in a room, and they didn't let them out until they had reviewed all of the literature and said, what are the average costs that we can expect? Now there's a range. This is the really hard stuff. But the absolute bottom of the barrel estimate of the costs applied to all of this carbon that would go up into the atmosphere if you started to log these federal lands is $8,000 an acre. And that's really absurdly low, because it doesn't include an awful lot of things. Very clear. Their middle estimate was $30,000 an acre. The most recent estimates, using literature that has been produced since 2013, the most recent estimates we have, $180,000 an acre. You know, that's like asking somebody if they've ever seen $1 billion. I've never seen $1 billion. I don't know what it is. I have a hard time understanding what $180,000 an acre is for carbon. But that almost certainly is still low. But it doesn't, for example, include acid acidification of the oceans, which is going to be a big deal. So what this says is that the costs of logging on these federal lands swamps that so that that's sort of a grain of sand on the beach. Now over here is a legacy from what we knew in the 1990s. In the 1990s, we knew that if you logged in particular areas where you had habitat for endangered species, or if you logged in areas where you have big trees that have fog drip, okay, the fog comes in, hopefully it doesn't have herbicides in it. The fog comes in, the big trees collected, it drops down, you get more water in the streams later in the year. The more you have undisturbed forest lands, the less sediment you have in the streams. That means that communities downstream don't have to pay to take that dirt out of the water. So in those areas, we've known for a long time that the value of these areas, the cost of logging, was over $20,000 an acre. So again, this is a big number, but there's nothing new in concept here. We've known for a long time that logging has benefits, but it also has costs. So what do we know? Can more logging stimulate economic growth? No. It can't. It will generate some, for some people, for some corporations. But while it's doing that over here, other people are losing over here. Can it generate stable high-wage jobs? Absolutely not. And from 1985 down to 2015, that's a very long trend, and there is no reason on earth to expect that that trend is going to go the other direction. Will the benefits exceed the costs? Not on federal lands. Not where you have these big trees. Now, still to be determined on other lands, and it really is sort of site-specific, what those trees look like. So it's possible, but not here. What else do we do? This is the other alternative. This map shows the net migration rate for 2000-2010. So it's the last decade. So it's the number of people moving in to a county versus the number of people moving out. Blue is people coming in. Red, people moving out. And there's no surprise, folks, where the red is. There's also no surprise where the blue is. This has been a driver of economic growth in the Pacific Northwest for decades. People wanting to move here for the quality of life. Now, some of that's trees, some of that's water, some of that's hunting, some of that's clean air, some of that's churches, some of that is safe streets, some of that is schools. But people move here, and when they move here, the ones who tend to move here tend to have more education, more money to invest, more skills. That's what's driving a large part of our economy in Oregon right now. So let's do a comparison here. I pulled these numbers together last year, again with the Wyden bill, which is a spin-off from the DeFazio bill. So let's look at existing jobs. Timber industry, 25 to 30,000. Outdoor recreation industry, who knew? But it's big for the state as a whole. The Wyden bill would have increased logging on 1 million acres. 1 million acres, about 1/10 the size of all private forest lands in the state. So if you increase logging on 1/10 the size of all private forest lands, you get maximum 1,600 jobs. And because that line's going down, you know that that's going to shrink over time. Same time, the outdoor recreation industry was adding about 7,000 jobs per year during the recession. So it has the ability to generate new jobs, whereas the timber industry really doesn't. Remember the economic forecast? The current economic forecast for Oregon? And that's recreation. But recreation is really small compared to this. This is really important. This says when you can attract talent, economies grow. When you can attract talent, you will attract corporate investment, because corporate investment needs good talent. So if Oregon can attract talent, it will grow. And here are the data. This one. Oregon employment, 1976-2014. We've already seen this graph, the timber industry. This is high tech. Went from about 20,000, it's now up around 90,000. Oh, yeah, okay, we all sort of knew that. It's not just Portland and Intel, by the way. You know, you have some of it down here, you have quite a bit of it down in the Rogue Valley. But look at this. This is real average wages. This means everything is in 2014 dollars. You've seen this before. Here's the Oregon average. Here's timber down here. Here's high tech. Went from $50,000 on average to $100,000 per person in the high tech industry. So every time that you can attract and create a new job in the high-tech industry, on average, you are bringing $100,000 into the economy. Every time that you build a new, or add a new job in the timber industry, you're around $45,000, and you've got all these other costs that go along with it. This is work that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank, looking at the correlation between amenities. Amenities is a fancy word for nice places. And there's a natural resource part of it. There's also a cultural part of it, restaurants, the arts, and the like. And bingo, there you are right there. So we're not talking about someplace else. We are talking about this entire set of information applies right here in Douglas County. So again, I'm not here to try to persuade you of anything. I'm trying to help you understand why people think that there are alternatives out there and why they think that there are trade-offs associated with these proposals to increase lobbying. But again, the benefits you see at the cross, cut the tree down. If they don't, cut the tree. Thank you.